So today we're incredibly honored to have three notable speakers share with us their takes on free expression and First Amendment rights for students.
Our first speaker is Karen Korematsu, civil rights activist and daughter of Fred Korematsu, plaintiff in the 1944 Supreme Court case Korematsu versus United States. Karen Korematsu co-founded and is the executive director of the Fred T. Korematsu Institute for Civil Rights and Education at the Asian Law Caucus in San Francisco. Fred Korematsu, a Japanese-American teenager during 1942, was arrested for not going to an internment camp. His case argued the constitutionality of internment camps, saying that the Fifth Amendment prevented the government from abusing its power. Although Korematsu lost his case based upon the ruling that the government had the power to infringe on individual rights to protect the nation, his case was a landmark case for the support of individual rights.
Korematsu's conviction was overturned after the disclosure of new evidence which had been withheld from the courts by the U.S. government during the war. We would now like to present Karen Korematsu.
Good morning. And thank you for that lovely introduction. First of all, I would like to thank Ms. Austin for inviting me here today, along with Mary Beth Tinker, who I know you're looking forward to hearing from as well. I just met Mary Beth in St. Louis last year, and we're just like kindred spirits, so it's fun to be together here again. And to begin with, I wanted you to kind of get a sense of my father. So we're going to see a short 4-minute trailer of the documentary called Of Civil Wrongs and Rights, the Fred Korematsu Story. And actually, it's a documentary that my mother had challenged my brother to make. I have a younger brother who's 4 years younger. His name is Ken. And however, it took over 11 years to make the documentary. It's not like now where you can shoot it off your phone, because funders thought that he would not be objective enough to tell a true story about his own father. But he kept going and never gave up, and then brought in his friend Eric Fournier to help finish the film as the director, because he had to step down as from the director seat to the co-producer seat. And in 2002, it received 2 Emmys for Best Director and Best Editing. So it's an Emmy Award-winning film that I hope will be shown someday here at the school as well. So without further ado, of Civil Wrongs and Rights, the Fred Korematsu story.
We expect the worst to happen, and it did. Curfew notices were posted on the telephone poles. And then after that, about a week or so, the notice for the evacuation.
I didn't think that the government would go as far as to include American citizens to be interned without a hearing. And then later on, they changed my draft card to 4C, which is enemy alien. In those days, if you're an Asian, people automatically think you don't belong in this country. You're not an American. And I thought that was wrong. After I was arrested, and I went there and I lied on the cot and I said, gee, jail was a lot better than it is.
In 1942, an ordinary American took an extraordinary stand. Fred Korematsu boldly opposed the forced internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. After being convicted for failing to report for relocation, Mr. Korematsu took his case all the way to the Supreme Court. The High Court ruled against him.
Fred Korematsu's case represented the trial that Japanese Americans never had. This was an entire population that, without evidence, without trial, without due process of any kind, were simply swept into internment camps, many losing their property, some even losing their lives.
The real significance of Fred's case is that it raised, for the first time, the central issue. Was the internment itself constitutional?
It was, I think, for him, a personal shock of recognition. Who am I? Am I an American? What does it mean for me to be an American?
If you look at Fred Korematsu, you see a very ordinary man who just wanted to be left alone, but who defied the United States government because he knew it was wrong.
Some names of ordinary citizens stand for millions of souls. Plessy, Brown, Parks. To that distinguished list, today we add the name of Fred Korematsu.
So that cute little 4-year-old there that you're seeing is my daddy. And actually, there are probably some pictures of yourselves at 4 years old, if you can think back that far. But probably his parents did not say to my father that someday he would grow up to be an American civil rights hero. You never know what's going to happen in life or what you're going to be faced with. But the one thing that I want all of you to know is that one person can make a difference. My father did, and so can you. My father was born in Oakland, California, so here in the Bay Area. My grandfather came over from Japan in 1905 and was able actually to buy land in East Oakland. It was an industrial part of Oakland, but he was able to buy the land before the Alien Land Law took into effect on August 10th, 1913. After that time, if you were an immigrant, you could not buy land in this country, or especially in California. And if you can see the laser here, the cute little guy in the front here in the sailor suit is my daddy. I think that was kind of a hand-me-down. But he was the third son of 4 boys. So he had an older brother, Hi, who was, I think is over here to the right, or no, behind him, sorry. And over here to the right was his, the second oldest, Uncle Harry, and then the baby was Uncle Joe. So my father always thought he was kind of third man out and was always ordered to do the chores that nobody else wanted to do. But he went to Castlemont High School in Oakland and experienced racism at that time. In fact, because of my grandfather's flower business, he would help, as his brothers did. And one day he went into San Leandro, which I don't know if you know where that is, but it's a smaller town next to Oakland. And he was delivering some flowers, and he wanted to get something to eat. So he went into a diner, and the cook behind the counter said, "Well, what do you want?" And my father said, "Well, I want to get something to eat." And he said, "Well, you don't belong here. You go down to Chinatown," and started blurting out some obscenities to him. And so that really hurt my father. And in fact, as you can see with that wonderful head of hair, he wanted a haircut because my grandmother used to cut his hair. And so when he was in high school, he said to her, "Well, I'm a big boy, so I want to go to a real barber shop." So again, he went into San Leandro because it was only a few blocks away from where they lived, and walked into a barber shop, and the barber said, "Hey boy, what do you want?" And my father said, "Well, I just want to get a haircut." "No, you get out of here," and started shouting names at him and profanities. "You don't belong here. You go down to Chinatown." So that's how the Asian Americans especially were being treated at that time. And in fact, before Pearl Harbor, there was the talk of a draft, something I hope you never experience, because the government knew that that America was probably going to be getting into World War II. So he and his friends, his buddies, he had 3 Caucasian friends, were sitting around one evening on a Friday night playing cards, and they decided that if they enlisted together, they could stay together. So they went down to the local post office, because that's how you enlisted into the armed services at that time. And they walked in, and they went to the National Guard desk and asked for an application. And the officer was giving applications to his 3 buddies, but not to my father. And the officer said, to my father, well, what's your name? And he said, Korematsu. And he says, well, you're Japanese. He said, yes. He says, well, I can't give you an application. And his buddies go, well, come on, Fred, let's go down to the Coast Guard desk. So here again, the officer is giving his 3 Caucasian buddies applications. And my father is waiting for his, and the officer says, well, I have orders not to give anyone that's Japanese an application. And my father said, but I'm an American. I want to serve my country. So how would you feel if someone said that to you? That here you wanted to do something for your own country that you lived in, that you grew up in, that you knew nothing else of any other country, and you were denied that right. So as he got older, you can see that this is about circa 1940, and my grandparents had worked very hard in this flower nursery, raised their family, and this is the state of what it looked like before Pearl Harbor. So once December 7th came along, everyone was very afraid. What was going to happen? What was going to happen to everyone, especially if they were Japanese? Because the racist remarks started building up. And in fact, I always hated to see this photograph, because even in elementary school, and I went to elementary school in San Lorenzo, which is in the East Bay, and around this time, the kids would always kind of point out what was happening and would say to me that I didn't belong here. I was Japanese, and they would blurt out racist names and say, "Go back to Japan. You don't belong here. It's your fault for the bombing of Pearl Harbor," which really wasn't fair, and it really hurt me. These types of things, this type of bullying, is not nice to experience. And in fact, my brother experienced the same type of treatment, but we never even talked about it. We never told our parents about what we were experiencing at that time. And so with the buildup of the war, this is Rosie the Riveter. I don't know if you've studied her yet, but she was kind of symbolizing women getting into helping the cause of the service. But also the Japanese and Japanese Americans were being demonized. So this is what was happening across the country. People said, "Oh, these people, if they're Japanese, or even if they're born here, they don't belong here. They're dangerous." And so on February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt issued a document called Executive Order 9066, which gave the military the authority to force remove anyone of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast. So, even if I'm half Japanese, but you only had to be 1/16 Japanese, and you still had to leave your home and be put into a prison camp. And this is the type of notices that started going up on telephone poles and in communities to tell people that basically they had to get ready to leave their homes. But then signs started going up like this, around up and down the coast. This is actually in Oakland, and this could even be the title to my father's story. I'm an American. What does it mean to be an American in this country? You know, my father always thought to be an American was to give back to this country and to be involved in community service. And even if you're not born here, even if you're not an American citizen, you help those people who are immigrants, who have issues and are trying to make a better life for themselves here. That's what being an American is. This is a map that shows basically the internment camps and the detention assembly centers that were first on the West Coast. There was first Zone 1 that the military created with this demarcation line that goes up and down the center of the states, but then they expanded it to include all of California because 2 of the internment camps were here. I can't really kind of see from this, but Manzanar and Tule Lake were the 2 that were in California. But they went as far as Arkansas, and which I can't see where. Oh, there it is, over there. But you know, that's how spread out these internment camps were. Now, you only had basically 48 hours to decide what you could take with you. So imagine, your parents have a whole house, you have a room. You can only take with you what you can carry in 2 hands, basically 50 pounds each. That's it. And you also had to take bedding because you didn't know, you know, you had to provide that, and then also you didn't know what kind of climate that you're going to be living in. And so, you know, back in those days, you couldn't take even, you know, flashlights. If you had a baseball bat, they consider that a weapon. And if something like this occurred now, you would not be able to take anything electronic. No computers, no iPods, nothing like that. So you'd have to leave all that behind. And so people had to decide, especially, you know, parents, what they could sell if in that short of time, what they could leave with friends, and what they could take with them, and what they had to leave behind. So in a lot of cases, people thought, well, I'll give this to my neighbor and ask my neighbor to hold on to these possessions for me. And in a lot of situations, people didn't even think that the Japanese and Japanese Americans were even coming back to the West Coast. So they would get rid of whatever they had, or they would sell it, or they would use it. And so this is kind of the feeling that was happening at the time. These young boys don't look very happy, you know, certainly, and their suitcases, before soft-sided, obviously, are bulging. And after you lived into a detention assembly center, which were basically horse stalls. So in the film, in the trailer, my father was referring to, you saw some horse stalls, you know, gee, jail was a lot better than this. So you had to report like to these racetracks for the Bay Area. Most of them went up to San Bruno, to Tanforan, and they would just whitewash the horse stalls. You'd have a dirt floor, you'd have a mattress with some straw in it, you'd have a light bulb, and it still smelled like manure. Now, we treat animals better than we treated the Japanese and the Japanese Americans at that time. And so after the government had to have enough time to build permanent camps across the U.S., and they took them to the train stations. You can see how, you know, those Japanese Americans are really dangerous looking with all these armed guards here. And when they rode across the United States in these trains, they had to ride with the shades down because they didn't want anybody to see out, and they didn't want anybody to see in. And you ended up in some place like this. Usually it was an Indian reservation, no trees, hotter than Hades in the summertime, freezing cold in the wintertime. You might have a pot-bellied stove on either end of the barrack. And then a lot of cases, several families would be in one barrack, and they would just string rope across the barracks and hang sheets or blankets, and that's how the different families lived for 3 or more years. And the mess halls and the latrines were way over here. In the mess halls, the way that these were built were just wood and tar paper, and the slats sometimes were open. So if you had a sandstorm, because you can see how that looks, you know, the sand would come up into their food, and then they couldn't even eat their food. And you know, they said, well, this, you know, to put the Japanese Americans in these prison camps really is for their own protection. But I always found it strange when I learned and saw this, that actually the guns were pointed in at the people. If you're going to protect someone, you're going to point them out. And in fact, one man got too close to this barbed wire because he was hard of hearing, and the military officer up here was shouting at him, and because he wouldn't stop, I mean, this is just a barbed wire, I don't know if you can see this, but he was just kind of collecting some driftwood or some other items to make a craft piece, and the guard shot him and killed him. And this could be you guys, living behind barbed wire in a prison, and you've done nothing wrong. And so teachers had to create their own classrooms. And I want you to shout out, what is this document? That's right. And I don't know if you can see this up here. Shout out, what are these 3 words? Louder. That's right. This Constitution is about you. This is a precious document in this country, and we continually have to fight for our civil rights. And Mary Beth will champion on more about this too. But don't forget this, because my father learned about the Constitution in high school. So that was how he was able to make some of the decisions that he did, because he thought he had civil rights. Think about it. You think you have civil rights, and then the government says, no, you don't. Is that right? No. And so the 4th and 14th Amendment especially were totally violated. So when the Japanese were told they had to leave their homes, there were no charges, there were no hearings, there was no access to attorneys, and there was no day in court. So all due process was totally violated just because of military necessity. So it took 2 years for my father's Supreme Court case, or his case to get to the Supreme Court. And he thought certainly by the time it got there, the Supreme Court would see that this order was unconstitutional. And so when he learned that the Supreme Court justices decided that it was still okay for the government to incarcerate 120,000 people, 2/3 were American citizens, by the way, he was totally disappointed. But it should be pointed out that this was a 6-3 decision, so it was not unanimous. And the 3 dissenting opinions are probably the most well-known and studied today, as you go on with your education especially. So Justice Jackson said about my father's Supreme Court case, this lies around like a loaded weapon, ready for anyone to pick up it with a plausible cause. And certainly after 9/11, when all of you were smaller, the government tried to do that. They tried to use my father's Supreme Court case, because it's still on the record, as a reason to round up Arab and Muslim Americans and possibly put them in, again, American concentration camps. So fast forward, I'll tell you a story. This is now my father with a crew cut, my mother, my younger brother Ken, who made the documentary, and that's me after a long summer of water skiing. I'm 16 years old in this picture. I'm in high school. I'm studying American history. And our American history teacher assigns each of us in our class a little paperback book to read. It was really thin. And we're to read it and get it up in front of the class and give our oral book report, not knowing what each other was reading. And I can't even remember what mine was. But my friend Maya, who is Japanese American, I know him since I was 5 years old, Sansei, 3rd generation like me, got up in front of the class, and her book was called Concentration Camps USA. Okay. Then she goes on and talks about the Japanese American internment. Oh, I say to myself, that's interesting. I never had heard about that before. And then she goes on to say, but there was this one man who avoided the military orders and was arrested, and his case was a famous Supreme Court case, Korematsu versus the United States. Oh, that's my name. And the only thing I knew is that Korematsu is an unusual Japanese name. So I've got 35 pairs of eyes looking at me. You know, you're in class, you zone out, I'm zoning out. And I'm thinking, oh, it's some black sheep of the family. Because she never said Fred. She just said Korematsu versus the United States. And so actually, I thought maybe it was my father's oldest brother, who didn't turn out to be such a shining light after all, as a firstborn. Or it could have been one of my grandfather's brothers who was here before Pearl Harbor but somehow disappeared. And so I asked my friend Maya after class, what's this about? And she says, well, this is about your dad. No way, I said. Somebody would have told me. So I go home and I confront my mother, and she goes, yes, this is about your father. And then I get the standard answer, wait till your father gets home, and then you can talk to him about it. 3 hours later, because my father experienced employment discrimination as well as housing discrimination, so he worked long hours. And so I asked him about this, and he said to me, well, you know, it happened a long time ago. And what he thought he did was right, and the government was wrong. And it was that clear and simple in his mind. And I could see the hurt in his eyes, and I couldn't ask him any more questions. The only thing I could blurt out was, can you vote? Because he had a criminal record. And he said yes, he could vote, because voting was always very important to my parents, because it is one of our cherished privileges in this country. And we should not take it for granted. So when you all get older, vote. And so it was something that we didn't talk about, and the irony to the story is my brother found out the same way in high school. So obviously we didn't have dinner talk. Fast forward 1983, this is the announcement that they have found the smoking gun. So you saw Professor Peter Irons in the film. He's right here. He found the evidence in Washington, D.C. when he was doing research that proved that there is no military necessity for the Japanese and Japanese Americans to be forced removed from their home. In fact, there was other reports that had been issued at that time to the government to say that there was no there was no evidence. And so they were able to reopen his case, and his conviction was overturned. And that basically set the precedent for the redress and reparations. The apology, the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, was the official apology to the Japanese and Japanese Americans. And they were proven right all along. And this weight lifted off not only my father's shoulders, but their shoulders as well, because the reason they never even talked about it, or my father didn't talk about it, is they just wanted to get on with their lives and be good American citizens. And so that's why my father received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So I want you to remember a couple of things. Remember to stand up for what is right. And when you see something wrong, don't be afraid to speak up. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story, Ms. Korematsu. Our next speakers are Frank LoMonte and Mary Beth Tinker.
Frank LoMonte is the current executive director of the Student Press Law Center, a nonprofit organization that provides legal counsel and educational materials to student journalists. He has experience in both journalism and law. He was previously a reporter for several daily newspapers in Georgia and Florida, and he graduated from the University of Georgia School of Law, where he was the senior editor of the Georgia Law Review. The Southern Interscholastic Press Association awarded him with the Elizabeth R. Dickey Distinguished Service Award, and the Society for Collegiate Journalists awarded him with the Lewis B. Englehart Freedom of Expression Award.
LoMonte is currently accompanying our third speaker, Mary Beth Tinker, on a tour across the nation aiming to educate students about their constitutional rights. Ms. Tinker, her brother John, and their friend Christopher Eckhart became plaintiffs in the 1969 Supreme Court case, Tinker versus Des Moines Independent School District, when they wore black armbands protesting the Vietnam War to school. The court case focused on the First Amendment of the Constitution and whether or not those rights were forfeited at the schoolhouse gate. Tinker won the case 7-2, thus setting a positive precedent for future issues of student free expression. Tinker is currently a youth rights and free speech activist. She began the Tinker Tour in 2013, aiming to promote free expression for students. We are lucky to be one of the 5 California schools that the Tinker Tour is visiting on their journey. So without further ado, we would like to present Frank LoMonte and Mary Beth Tinker.
Thank you very much for having us here. It's wonderful to be here. Frank.
Thanks. Oh, and that was just breathtaking. Wow. Karen Korematsu, that was a beautifully told story and really powerful. It's hard to follow that. Thanks for sharing it with us. I recognize that my role today, I'm the slice of bologna in between 2 pieces of history, so I'm going to be very brief. I do need to say a huge thank you to your administration here at Harker, to Mr. Nikoloff, to Ms. Garland, to Mr. Keller, not only for allowing us to share this day with you, but for running a school that really, really values, believes, and puts its money where its mouth is in terms of the freedom of expression and valuing the power of inquisitive young minds. When you bring Ellen Austin into your school, you know what you're getting. When you bring the person who literally is the best journalism teacher in America and has the trophy to prove it, you know that you're getting a tigress. You know that you're not getting a sleepy little newspaper, and that is what she has brought, the energy, the enthusiasm, the excitement to this program is something special to see, and we thank Ellen for everything she did to make our visit this week possible. Two really quick things. First of all, I am so struck by this story today that even though to you in this room who are 16 or 17, 70 years seems like it is an eternity. I mean, what we saw, these events, are not ancient history. This is not Babylonia. We're talking about 70 years ago, and in one lifetime, right, history has advanced so rapidly that we can look back now at things that happened 70 years ago, and we can just shake our heads and say, I can't believe we were ever so backward. I can't believe we ever thought that way in America. And I am here to tell you that we're going to do that again in another generation. We're going to look back and we're going to say, I can't believe we ever thought that students were second-class citizens. I can't believe that we ever thought that we could... I can't believe that we ever thought that we could single out kids as being some kind of other species that deserve differentially poor legal treatment. We have laws right now in the books in our country in places like North Carolina where you can go to jail just for making fun of a school administrator online, conduct that would be constitutionally protected. If you did it or I did it, you can spend a year in jail if you're a kid. We have kids in jail. We have kids who have been convicted of crimes in New York, in Wisconsin, convicted of crimes, not disciplined by their schools, just for mean Facebook pages. We're throwing jail at kids for meanness online. We're going to look back and shake our heads and say, I can't believe we ever thought that way. And I hope it doesn't take us 70 years to get there. The other thing I want to say, the Tinker Tour and the whole purpose of it was to bring a piece of history into the backyards of people all across America, to share a moment of history with all of you, but to also help you understand that history is not always made by giants. Sometimes it's made by 13-year-olds, and sometimes it's made in really small moments where at the time it never occurs to you that this is a life-defining or a world-changing moment. And so because of that, because small moments sometimes add up to amazing breakthroughs in history, we should treat everyone around us like they might be a hero, because who knows, they might be. And we should treat every moment like it might be a history-making one, because who knows, it might be. Guys, go do awesome things, and I can't wait to hear from Mary Beth. Let's go on with the show.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you. Thank you very much. Karen Korematsu and Frank LoMonte, heroes of your rights. Thank you. Oh, it's so good to be here with all of you at Harker. I love the message that Karen and Frank gave today about ordinary people speaking up for what's right. And your head of school here at Harker, I believe in this wonderful new issue of the Winged Post. Yay, where's all the journalists? All right. Journalism, you're keeping the free press alive. Yes, he said, Mr. Nikoloff, sometimes community standards are there to be challenged. Think so? Sometimes they're there for a reason, but sometimes we need to challenge things. And young people like you have been challenging things all through history. Did you know that? Yeah. Challenging, standing up, speaking up for a better way. We're coming from a place in our history where we had slaves building our White House and our Capitol. This is our great democracy. We were locking up Japanese in World War II for simply being Japanese. And don't forget that we were at war with Germany. They didn't have internment camps for Germans, did they? Did we? No. But we had them for the Japanese. It's racism. We're coming from a place where democratic values need to be realized. We need to grow our democracy and go towards better days and better values of equality, justice. These are our values that young people all through history have been standing up and speaking up for. In the 1950s, after the war, after Fred Korematsu took his courageous stand, in 1955, there was a young woman who sat on a bus who refused to get up off the bus. I was a small child. I was just growing up. Who was the young woman? Rosa Parks? I know you're going to say Rosa Parks. But you know who it was? Claudette Colvin. Yeah, Rosa Parks did her thing too, but Claudette did hers 1 year earlier. Also in Montgomery, Alabama. She was 15 years old. She refused to get up off of the white section of the bus because she had learned in her history class that we're supposed to have democracy here, and we're supposed to have equality. Where's all you history teachers, librarians, school administrators? All right. You have it. All of you have your allies, your teachers who are teaching you about these values that we have. And Claudette stood up and spoke up a year before Rosa Parks. She was 15, as young people have all through history, because you have wonderful qualities. Like, what are some of them? Creativity, right? Courage, strength, imagination, something that Einstein said was even more important than knowledge. And that same year, 1955, when Claudette and, later, Rosa Parks took their action for democracy, there was another young woman. She was only 10 years old. Well, she was 12 by then. Her name was Sadako Sasaki. And when she was 2 years old, her town, Hiroshima, in Japan, had been bombed by an atom bomb. And as she grew up, slowly she started getting weaker and tired and sick. And I'm a nurse, and I work with young people and teenagers as a nurse. And I can just imagine how Sadako was starting to feel as she started developing leukemia from the radiation that she had been exposed to. But Sadako decided that she was going to start folding peace cranes, because someone told her that if she folded 1,000 peace cranes, that she could have any wish. And her wish was to be healthy and strong. Young people are affected by war. Some people say young people are the most affected by war. And young people like you are affected by all of the policies, all of the decisions, all of the rules, all of the laws that are passed that affect your lives. You should have some say in those policies. Do you agree? Yeah, come on. All right. Sadako Sasaki, she started folding her peace cranes. And you can see a monument to her in Japan. She didn't make it to her goal of 1,000 peace cranes. And so we have to continue her mission of carrying on the message of peace and folding those peace cranes. And I was growing up, and my father was a Methodist minister, and he went to Japan after the war, and he came back and told us about the peace cranes and told us about peace. And we sang songs in church like, Jesus loves the little children. And we learned that peace is a way, and that young people have stood up for peace and for so many advances in our world. And so we got that idea that that's a way to live, to speak up for what's right. As Ms. Korematsu said, standing up for what's right is something that ordinary people do. And so many of them have been young people and still are today. In 1965, the Vietnam War was building up, and now us kids would watch on TV the scenes of the war and the children who were running from their burning huts. And we heard about something called napalm, which is a sticky gel that was made by Dow Chemical Company here in the United States. It's basically chemical warfare, and it was dropped onto the towns and villages of Vietnam. Well, they couldn't just aim it at the so-called enemy. It would get on everyone. It would get on the children. It would get on the families. And it would burn the skin, and we heard about this, and you couldn't just wash it off. And now I'm a nurse, and I've taken care of many kids that had burns, but even then, I could imagine how it must be. Because that's another wonderful quality of all of you young people. You have empathy. You feel things with your hearts. It's like one 7th grader told me recently in Ohio, we're just fresher. And I say, yes, you are fresher. Because you feel these things for the first time, and you look at the world and you say, we could do better. That's how we felt. And so my brother and some of our friends, we decided to do something simple and just wear a black armband to school. Because we wanted to use our rights, and we thought we should have some rights too, and we wanted to speak up for peace. It was Christmas time, which is all about peace. And so we decided to wear simple black armbands to school to say that we were in favor of peace and that we were sad about war. Like Fred Korematsu, we wanted to speak up for what was right. What we had learned was right. But the principals, not like your principals, they decided that that wasn't to be done. That would be against the rules, and anybody wearing an armband to school would be suspended. And so then I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure, because I was an ordinary girl, and I went roller skating, and I studied, and I had slumber parties, and I didn't know if I should make such a big stand and maybe get in trouble, but in the end I decided that I should. And I went to school and I was very scared, and then I saw Mr. Moberly, my math teacher, and he was standing at the door of the math class with a pink slip in his hand, and I was really scared. And I went down to the office, and Miss Tanner, the girls' advisor, told me, now Mary Beth, I'm surprised at you. You're a good student. Now take that armband off. So with great courage, I said, okay, Mrs. Tanner, here you go, and I put it over there on her desk. I had just run out of courage. But as I learned later, and I'm learning every day still, if you just use the little bit of courage that you have in life, sometimes you'll be amazed at what can happen and what you can do with that. And with my little bit of courage, it turned out that, well, I got suspended anyway, first of all. And then a group named the American Civil Liberties Union, which has been standing up for 100 years for the Bill of Rights. And they stood up for Fred Korematsu as well. Because they go to the Supreme Court more than any organization in the United States. Why? Because their whole mission is to stand up for the Bill of Rights, and they thought that kids should have rights too. So when my brother John got suspended, and some other kids like Bruce Clark and Chris Singer, there's my brave mother and my brave father, because when you're standing up for something you believe in, it's not always going to be popular. And people threatened to bomb our house, and they threw red paint at our house, and my parents, once we convinced them, yeah, see, kids are also very persuasive. We convinced them, yeah, why we were doing what we were doing. We explained to them, and then they stood by us. We were lucky for that. And there's Chris Singer and Bruce Clark. Other kids, a few others got suspended. And when we got suspended, the American Civil Liberties Union came to help us. But they said, first you have to go to the school board and try to change their mind. And that's a picture of us at the school board, trying to change their mind. Just like Fred Korematsu, some people voted for us, and they said, yes, that's right, those kids should have the right to wear the armbands. But they were outvoted, and so it went to court. And we lost at the district level. And the lawyers and the judges, for the school, they said, no, these kids should not have broken the rules. They should not have done what your head of school said, to challenge the way things are. And so we lost. And then it went to the appeals court, where we lost again. But eventually, when I was a junior in high school, thanks in great part to a group of African American students in Mississippi in 1964 who also spoke up during Mississippi Freedom Summer. And they wore buttons to school to protest the terror of the Ku Klux Klan and the killing of Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman. Thanks in part to them as well, and to all of the civil rights workers who were part of that struggle. We won our case in 1969 at the Supreme Court by 7-2, and the judges, the Supreme Court justices, cited the Mississippi students in their ruling, saying that the Tinkers and the Eckharts and the other students that had worn armbands in Des Moines, Iowa in 1965 did not disturb the school, and that neither teachers or students leave their rights when they enter the schoolhouse gate. So it was a great victory for students and teachers. Yeah. All over the United States. It wasn't just a victory for us. I grew up, I became a nurse, I started working with young people, and I didn't have any idea that this was such an important case. But life went on, and I found that I was meeting so many young people all over the country and even all over the world. I hear about young people standing up and speaking up for their rights, because this is an international human rights issue. Children's rights, teenagers' rights. And when we encourage all of you to stand up and speak up, and we see these wonderful articles that you're writing about in your newspapers, the world is a better place. We're able to benefit from your creativity and your ideas and your energy and your love, because it's really all about love, as a teenage boy told me recently at a program. He said, I think it's really all about love. And I think it is. The First Amendment is about love. It's about how we show respect for each other and how we show love for each other by encouraging each person to have a say in democracy. And that includes all of you young people. So thank you very much for having us here today, and thank you for this wonderful program, and stand up for your rights. All right.
We have a few questions for our three speakers.
So this question is for Ms. Tinker. What was going through your mind the first time you entered the courtroom?
What was going through my mind in the courtroom? I was very shy, and I was really intimidated and nervous. And I was just thinking, gee, I hope we say the right thing. I hope I say the right thing. Kind of like I feel right now. Yeah. So that's what was going through my mind.
And this one is for Ms. Korematsu. What is the most important lesson that you took away from your father's experience?
I think the most important lesson that I always try to share with everyone is from the reaction that my father, or when my father told me, you know, why he had resisted the military orders, and to have a sense of right and wrong. You know, that he felt deeply that he was right and the government was wrong. And so he had to make a decision. Which was, you know, very difficult at that time. But not only was he making that decision for himself, but he was also making that decision for his community. And I think once your cause is greater than yourself, then it is the right thing. But you have to truly believe it. You know, and people will tell you, I mean, even when my father's case was being reopened in 1983, his own Japanese community didn't want him to reopen his case. He didn't have the support. At that time that they were trying to get a redress and reparations from the government. So they said, well, Fred, if you reopen your case and lose, then that jeopardizes, you know, our chances. And so he had gone through this all alone. Even when he was arrested, his Japanese American community didn't want anything to do with him because they thought that if they associated with him, some harm might come to them. And so even there was a meeting that when they were at Tan Fran with some of the community men that were trying to decide whether or not my father was to take his case all the way to the Supreme Court. Well, they didn't think that he should, but he thought he should. And so when you really believe deep down inside that you're doing the right thing and it's peaceful, then you have to go with your gut and listen to yourself. Because in the end, it, like Mary Beth, not knowing, it's for the greater good for everyone.
This one is from Ms. Tinker. How has the Tinker Tour across America affected the high school journalism community and the people that you speak to?
Well, we're lighting a fire under young journalists, and I hope you all feel it today. You feel the fire? Come on, guys. All right. Yeah. We want to encourage you. We love you, and we want to encourage you. So that's our message, right, Frank? What do you say? You're the...
So yeah, I'm so glad you asked that because we actually have, the evidence is coming in that it is, in fact, positively affecting high school journalism around the country. We just heard a couple of weeks ago from a student editor up in Wisconsin whose newspaper, unfortunately, doesn't have some of the press freedoms that you have here in California. She was being essentially punished for writing a story that was a very honest, truth-telling, hard-hitting story about how hurtful it is for young people who have been survivors of sexual assault to hear people joke about rape and sexual assault, and that was the cover story on their newspaper. Beautifully done, professional job, acclaimed by professional journalists and rape awareness counselors and by journalism college professors as being an exemplary piece of work, and her school district decided that nothing like that should ever be in the paper again, and they were going to clamp down and control it so it would never appear again. And the student editor told us, I got the courage to resist and to go in front of my school board and try to get that policy changed because Tinker Tour came to my town and Mary Beth Tinker inspired me to do it.
And we're also encouraging students who have no school journalism program, because more than half of the schools in the United States have zero journalism program. They may not even have a librarian. There's huge inequality right now. We're living in a period a lot like the 1960s, actually, when I was growing up. Great inequality, racial discrimination, even war with the war economy, etc. So yes, that's onward to equality and having all schools have a journalism program.
So this is also to Ms. Tinker. I was wondering, what can we do as students more than just have like a journalism program or write in our sort of journal? Is there anything else that we can do to sort of have more influence in like the political sphere or any other like area where we don't exactly have more of a voice right now?
Yes. What else can you do? Well, one city in Maryland, Tacoma Park, Maryland, they figured out what to do, the young people there. They succeeded in lowering the voting age to 16 for all local elections. So I'm calling for a lowering of the voting age to at least 16, but I'd leave it up to all of you to decide what age it really should be. Maybe it should be actually a little lower, I'm not sure. What do you think about that? We lower the voting age? Come on. Should you have a right to vote for your school board that runs your schools? Should you have a right to be on the school board with a vote? Did you know that only one county has a voting member on a school board with a student member? There's two, sorry. So I would have to ask you all, what else can you do? Let's hear from one of the students. What else can you do to stand up and speak up? Okay, who's got it? Come on, stand up. You got to stand up right now and speak up. Abolish the dress code. Okay, let's say he wants to abolish the dress code. Wow. I think you could it looks like you could start a campaign on that issue. That could be your platform. Okay, let's say this is a good example. If there's something in life you want to change, you can either do nothing or you can do something. Let's say that is your issue. Let's say you pick an issue. You could do nothing, but that's so boring. Or you could do something about it. So if you really want to change the dress code, you could use your 5 rights of the First Amendment, which are free press, free speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition, freedom of religion. You can use your rights to change things. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much for having us here. Come on.
So we would like to extend a big thank you to all 3 of our speakers, Mr. Frank LoMonte, Ms. Mary Beth Tinker, and Ms. Karen Korematsu, for sharing their perspectives on the First Amendment with us. As students, we greatly value hearing about the rights that we might sometimes take for granted from day to day. So students and faculty, if you have any further questions or would like to speak to any of our 3 guests, or if you would like them to sign an armband for you, you can visit them in the Cyberloft during either lunch period. And just a couple of reminders, issue 6 of the paper is out today, so you can read more about the Tinker Tour there. And also, ASB voting will take place during lunch, so take advantage of your constitutional rights and go vote. Thank you.